it's foundational for the health and well-being and functionality of like every system in your body. And if you divorce yourself from that entire range of motion, then we run into a whole large scenario.
And what are those? Every time I get together with Aaron, I walk away happier, smarter, and more inspired. And this episode is no different. Now, we really start this conversation digging straight into the secrets to a healthy mind and body. So especially when it comes to you wanting to not just look the way that you want to look, but being able to feel and perform the way that you want to on a day-to-day level, Aaron is one of the world's best. But we go far deeper. We really delve also into this episode, what really means and how you are able to live a life that has more meaning, more purpose, more fulfillment as well. Now, if you're joining us on the podcast right now, then please go join us on the Chris Dufey YouTube channel, because you'll see this conversation unfold on camera as we get together in Austin, Texas together. And for you to share this out on social, please share it out on social, but also please share it out and tag myself and Aaron as well, as I'd love to know what you're going to be taking away from this episode. That's why we're here. I don't want you just listening to this stuff. I want you to be able to apply and actually put something in place to better yourself, to better your life. That's why we're here. So tag me on social and make sure that I can personally say thank you to you for you joining us in this episode.
From the last time that we were together in Venice to now, has the trajectory in where you want to go changed?
In which way?
Well, like what you want to do with your work, what you want to do with yourself.
I don't think so. Things I've like honed in more specific details of things, but no, I think generally speaking, nothing's changed that much.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And how did you find bringing this to life?
In what sense?
In the actual process of finishing the book? Because I think you were maybe like halfway through when we were together last time with this.
Well, so this is the second version.
Yep.
And so there was another version that came out like, I don't know, 2.5 years ago or something. That's an old photo.
I love the beard.
Yeah, the beard's the move. The publishers aren't like a huge fan of the beard.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the second version. So the second version was much easier to come out. It was just like, lots of editing.
Yeah.
We add a new chapter at the end.
Yeah.
It's all just movement based for the most part. There's some writing, but not a ton.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't very hard. It was like a cool opportunity because when you create something, as you already know, like you think it's the thing that you want it to be, and then it goes out, and then you read it again while it's out, and you're like, oh man, I'd like to change this and this. And then if you read it again in a year, you're like, oh man, I would change all this. And if you read it in 2 years, you're like, oh my God, now it's like practically irrelevant. And so,
if you could write something now, what would it be?
Well, the next book that I will likely do a proposal for will be about the value of being on the ground, like getting your hips below the height of your knees on the ground. So you can be on chairs, just sit like this more often. And culture's inability to do that, or divorcing themselves from that, it's foundational for the health and well-being and functionality of like every system in your body. And if you divorce yourself from that entire range of motion, then we run into a whole large scenario.
And what are those scenarios? Like, what are the problems someone could be facing now that you would be like, oh, that's related because of what we're talking about
here?
Polypoid
dysfunction, osteoarthritis in the hips and the knees, like limitation of range of motion in the ankles and toes and hips, etc. Upstream effects of gait patterning and just like general athleticism, circulation issues, so like deep vein thromboses and like blood clots and things of the sort. Just general, the body functions as a system, like global level, shittier when the whole body isn't integrated and circulated and moving well. And so when you're in a position of being stuck at like 90 degrees at all your major joints for 90% of your day, it's like a fraction of the human physical potential. And so a more natural, in quotations, lifestyle, which could absolutely be integrated into a modern environment, you would just but in a more natural, in quotations, existence where you're like living outside or whatever, your body would naturally go through those ranges of motion.
Yeah.
And so in modernity, most of those ranges are kind of just like stripped from the table.
Yes.
And then what that leads to is a lot of things, but it would be a major part of the total global pie of human health and well-being. It's not all of it. It's exposure to sunlight, sleep patterns, nutrition patterns, relationships, like purpose. But movement is foundational for all of that. And so if you just take out, a massive chunk, call it maybe say 33% of like the normal human range of motion, there's upstream, downstream effects of removing that motion from the pie.
Can I ask you, Aaron, when it comes to like fitness enthusiasts, gym junkies, that crowd, what do you see that they're doing incorrectly that they could change easily that would have like upstream benefits to everything else?
Just get out of the gym.
Yeah.
Just like make realize that your fitness is not just like the movement patterning that you do inside of a blue lit box that you got inside of your car box and put on your air conditioner and sat and hunched over and drove there and then put on your Bluetooth headphones and radiated yourself and then removed yourself from like all of the fitness. It's like literally just like dragging your ass outside and taking your shirt off would be one of the greatest fitness feats any modern person could do for themselves. And instead of, so what I would suggest is overlaying all the different fitness variables into your experience. Just be more efficient with time usage. So if you're going to work out, which working out is like a strange, abstract concept for the human species. It's like a brilliant, strange waste of energy. And you're like, do this. Because like you're evolutionarily speaking, you're tuned up to do actual work. So now you're gonna like pretend like you're doing work inside of a space that's totally foreign to the human organism. Like we go through regular light cycles, we go through thermoregulation, we get hot, we get cold, we get nervous, we have to problem solve, there's weather coming, there's all of that, like all of that is fitness. But now all of that's being relegated into like one small container of, we do it in the gym, and then most of our physical expression is like kind of, it's outsourced into just processing on a computer. Processing on a computer in the sense of like your work is like sitting on a computer doing things, and like things are moving in the world, but you're just kind of like a brain that's sitting in front and projecting movement through your fingertips.
Why is no one else talking about this?
People talk about it.
I don't see it that common.
Am
I just in the wrong circles? Am I blinding myself to it?
No, I mean,
why I love your stuff is because I'm like, oh shit, like this is really good, like this is novel, like this is do you know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah, but I mean, the stuff that I'm interested in is just things that are just very like low hanging fruit, simple, obvious, like no brainer, like oh my god, like duh, as opposed to like the really complex kind of like here's the perfect high intensity training workout or this this specific fitness regimen. I'm more interested in like how can we make it so that it's who you are as a person. To me, that's just what sticks. But there's a lot of people that think like that. I think most people that I talked about too on my podcast, at least for the most part, like buy that idea at least. And then not everyone would align with my kind of like, I'm somewhat like heretical with my perspective where I'm like, what we're doing is like wrong, like we're doing it wrong as a whole, and so I think that there's maybe other people that are like working within the system more. That matches for some people.
Where you're saying like just get out of the container and do something completely different rather than trying to work in it.
Board. You're not on the right board.
Play a different game.
Your board's wrong.
Okay. No, I get that. I think that's really good. I know for sure I've fallen into the camp of just like I'm going to train and I'm going to train at the gym and I do this between this hour that I have in the day because then I've got these other things to do. And I got to a point, it was a while ago, I was like, shit, I feel just robotic. Do you know what I mean? Like just all one line of plane of movement. And that's when I was like, I'm going to get back into kickboxing. And then I was back into kickboxing for a while. I was like, this is really good. But then I found everything was just like really yang. I was just like, everything I was doing was very yang based. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to get back into qigong. And so I got a practitioner to be like, all right, let's do one-on-ones. I want to be doing this and like putting that back into my kind of like daily practice.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding myself. A few times a week practice, not daily practice, I'll be honest. What's your advice for someone that was like that me before I started to make those changes?
The advice to a person that feels like overly structured, linear, in their like movement exploration or practice.
Or maybe, sorry, can I just take this one step to the side? Someone that's like, I go to the gym to do this exercise class at between 6 to 7 a.m. in the day, and that's what I do for movement. What's the advice there?
Well, so now this is podcast land. I wasn't sure whether we were recording or not. Okay, well, so this is specific for other folks other than just yourself. So someone that I'm an admirer of is a guy called Bruce Lipton. Familiar with him? With biology is belief. I recorded a conversation with him like a couple of years ago or so on my podcast, and went out to his house. He was like someone I've looked up to since I was like 16. He was like I've been one of his biggest fans for a very long time. So it was a very cool experience.
That's awesome.
He gave me a big jar of weed that he like grew at his place in California. It was like a very cool thing for me. But one of the things that Bruce, he's a cellular biologist. He's like pioneered most of a lot of the work around epigenetics. So now it's like a common term that gets thrown around. A good chunk of that conversation is on the shoulders of Bruce Lipton, which is very cool. And what he would suggest in the realm of cellular biology is if you have a cell in a petri dish and you want to change the structure of the cell, you don't do anything to the cell itself, you change the constitution of the dish that the cell exists within.
The environment.
Yeah. So for a person that wants to augment if they feel kind of stuffy, stuck, rigid in their bodies, they feel really like overly linear, they feel like kind of like they're turning into like a computer, which would make sense because that's one of the most amazing traits of humans is our capacity for adaptation and our capacity for communication, which essentially is like we adapt through communication in a way. We like communicate to our environment, we attune with our environment. So I would treat the individual like a cell and change the environment that they're existing in. So I would say maybe start swimming more. If you're nearby an ocean, which you are at Bali, I'd be saying like maybe take up surfing, maybe take up like tango or some type of dance class, maybe take up martial arts like you've already done, and just place yourself into that other, in this case, movement container, movement stew, and just allow your body to adapt to that new environment, and then take yourself back into that structured linear gym workout, and you will likely have new ideas to start to kind of like integrate into your old stuffy linear structured workout. There's nothing wrong with linear structured workouts unless that's where it ends, because the body doesn't understand straight lines. It travels in straight lines through spirals. Like for your body to be able to go in this sagittal being like both lines going forward plane, and for you to be able to go through your toe hinge and your ankle dorsiflexion and the rotation of your tibia in relation to the knee and rotation of the femur in relation to the hip, and the hip to be able to go into like and the spine and the shoulder, the whole thing. It's all of these spiral motions. So for your body to even move in a straight plane, it's actually through all of these rounded edges throughout the internal system, the way the body moves. And so when you get into something like, say, boxing or kickboxing or any grappling or pitching, throwing a baseball, football, frisbee, any of that, you really tap into those spiral motions of the body. And then fitness just gets much more interesting. So as opposed to being like an isolated system where you're doing bodybuilding workouts, and you're really like, you're training the bicep just for the sake of creating size in the bicep, but there's no awareness of integrating the bicep to the hand, to the shoulder, to the spine, to the hips, to the feet, to be able to actually do,
something
meaningful, something meaningful with your life, other than just have bigger fucking arms. It just becomes dramatically more interesting when you start to become engaged with like this like art and science of moving well. And so if nothing else, it just makes life more interesting. It's like looking up at the stars and seeing just like these little like polka dots in like this black sheet. It's like, cool, polka dots in a black sheet. Like, awesome. That's kind of weird. I guess I could actually kind of trip out on how interesting that is in and of itself. But then you start to, you talk to Neil deGrasse Tyson, or you talk to someone that's like really into space, and they start to open up like, oh, black holes, and you start to learn about, the names of the different places, and oh my God, the light from that star is actually from 200 years ago. Like, wow, like this is crazy. So your lived experience of just looking up towards the sky becomes more sensational as a product of investing and understanding that experience. And so in physical movement, like there's no life without movement. Like that's essentially like your thinking brain is bootstrapped on top of the movement brain.
Yes.
So we're governed through that limbic system, through that like reptilian, mammalian, like gather food, gather sex, create shelter, like keep the body safe, contained, supported, and now let's spread it. All that comes through movement. There's no just thinking ourselves into really anything from an evolutionary perspective. It's thinking to movement. And so if you can have a clear passage where I think, and then it comes out as this, kind of powerful. So your question is in relation to, does it go bottom up?
Yes.
So does the way that the body moves inform the way that we think and then feel and express and all that stuff? Yeah. So that's the. Have you ever heard of Sir William James? He's known as the father of modern psychology.
Yeah, I literally just nearly finished reading The Varieties of Religious Experiences.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so he kind of like Bruce Lipton pioneered a lot of the ideas around epigenetics. Yeah. William James would be one of the earlier adopters, at least like, writing down in philosophical books and such and texts of that bottom-up perspective. That it's our physical movement that informs the way that we think and the way that we feel. Just like the way that we think and the way that we feel informs the way that we move. So that the term for it in like science speak would be postural feedback. And so you can hear this with like the Amy Cuddy TED Talk, which was very popular. It's like one of the most popular TED Talks ever, actually. And it's also had a lot of contention around it as well. But in her research from Harvard, they suggested that people standing in hunched over positions, so the way that they're moving, would increase the levels of testosterone. I think it was by like 20%. Yeah, if you're standing in an upright, strong, stable position, and then if you're standing, and then the inverse would happen with your cortisol, which is a commonly measured stress hormone. That would reduce by, it was like, I think either 20 or 23%. Wow. I might be switching those numbers around. Testosterone, one was 20, one was 23. Doesn't really matter. Yeah. Call it 20. Yeah. And then if you were in a hunched over position, so in my book, The Align Method, I refer to that as the mopey postural archetype. And then the upright position would be the aligned postural archetype. Person standing in that mopey postural archetype for, it was just a couple minutes. They would do saliva samples, measure testosterone, and measure cortisol levels again. And then essentially the same thing would happen, but the opposite. So cortisol ends up going up, testosterone ends up diminishing. And I mean, there's endless research around postural feedback. There's other research done with where the researchers put pencils in the subject's teeth. A lot of people heard about this. Is that what the pencil would do? A person to go into a smile position, and then suddenly they start to perceive the world as being more funny and more entertaining. Like, wow, like this is, I don't know why this is so interesting. And you're familiar with NLP. Tony Robbins is like a big advocate of NLP. Richard Bandler is like one of the co-founders of it. In NLP speak, they would refer to this as anchoring, right? So we can anchor certain music, for example, to certain felt states. So before you do podcast interview, perhaps, or before you do something meaningful, if you do train jiu-jitsu before a competition or something like that, you might have a specific song that you listen to. And so every time you hear that song, it sends the rest of your physiology into this almost like imprinted memory of like, oh, this I feel psyched up when I hear this song from Tupac or whatever. It's a similar pattern with the way that we move. Every time you smile like that, unless you're smiling with just your face. If you're smiling just with your mouth, that's actually weird. If you're smiling, have a genuine smile, you want to smile with the eyes as well. It's called the Duchenne smile. It's from a French anatomist.
With the eyes?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Smizing.
Yeah.
And so that pattern of smiling since the beginning of humanity, as long as we could possibly measure at least, and this is true across the board in all cultures. When a person feels happy, delighted, all those things, their face gets pulled into that position. So we are anchoring that over and over and over and over and over again throughout history, in our present lives and ancestrally, and onward and beyond. And so when you tap into that movement position, it's kind of like listening to that song, your pre-jiu-jitsu warm-up, get psyched song. Then the inverse would happen when people would put it was a golf tee in their eyebrow, so it kind of forced them into like resting bitch face. So suddenly they start to perceive the world as being more annoying. So we scrunch our face up, and suddenly we perceive the world as though we're kind of like retracting.
Can I just say something really
world.
funny, Pizzy? So,
Yeah.
do you know Todd Herman?
No.
Oh, okay. He wrote an amazing book, The Alter Ego Effect. Actually, really, really good book. I remember we were on a mastermind call a little while ago, and I was sitting there, and there's heaps of people on this call, and then Todd unmutes himself and goes, "Chris, you got bitch face too." Because I was sitting there like thinking about something, and I was like, sitting there, and he's like, "I have the same thing. Like people think I'm really upset, but I'm just sitting there like thinking, like working something out in my head."
Well, you think of yourself as being, Chris. You think of yourself as like you have all this story, this narrative of who you think you are, but then underneath that pretty shallow story, I think, of who we think we are, is lots of other stories. And one of those stories is that limbic self, that mammalian self, that if the lights are really bright in the room, our pupils will start to contract and resist, and maybe if a loud sound comes in, bang, we're going to have, maybe our masseters will contract, maybe our traps will contract, maybe we'll go into like a forward folded protective postural pattern. All that's happening at an autonomic level. All that's happening at a subconscious level. You start to tap into those parts as well. Monks do it, David Blaine does it. Like we all have access to tap into those parts, but there's that system is running, kind of like running the show, you could say. That's like the mass of the iceberg underneath the ocean. And then the tip of the iceberg is what we call Michael, Larry, Bob, and Lisa. And so if you can start to tap into that limbic self or that mammalian self and start to tap into those patterns, they're fairly like immutable. They're like it's a part of the human experience, the human organism experience. And you start to realize like, oh wow, interesting. Like all of those levers of the way that we communicate, whether we're smiling, whether we're resting bitch facing, whether our breath is shallow, whether our breath is deep, whether our breath is more on the inhale or more on the exhale. As you're inhaling, that's going to turn on more of that sympathetic side of the nervous system, like fight, flight, like action, go. As you're doing an exhale, that's going to turn on more of that parasympathetic, calm, rest, digest side of the nervous system. So all of those systems are happening, whether we're aware of them or not. And so if you're living in a modern world that's, artificially lit for most of the day, which is brand new, like the introduction of the light bulb, I think was like the late 1800s is when it was like, is it 1879 or 76 or something like that? It was like 140 years ago, like not long ago. And all of your like eternity before that, the human organism was only exposed to blue light when the sun was out. And it wasn't just this alternating current light, this like flickering, flipping light that we're exposed to in homes for the most part, unless you get incandescent bulbs.
Yep.
It's this direct current. Like that's when you walk out in the sun, it just feels like, it's like sunbathing. It's like pouring over you. Whereas when you're getting that alternating current light from, most light bulbs inside of a house, it's more like this like supplement form of blue light is like slapping you repeatedly. Like that's the way it's projecting against you. It's not just one direct current of light.
Yes.
That's brand new. And so just little like that would be one example of like, oh, interesting. Okay. The modern world is really cool. It allows us to get more like work in quotations done. But what the health of all of my cells and my emotions and myself and everything runs on is that bigger part of my ancestry. It's just tapping in and saying, okay, cool, we have access to light, love that as a tool, but I'm going to pay attention to my circadian rhythms. When I get up in the morning, I'm going to expose my eyeballs to sunlight like first thing. I'm going to get that long wavelength, red and orange, that spectrum of light, because it's incredibly healing for my entire physiology. It sets my circadian rhythm up for, release of cortisol and the stress hormones to like get me up and at 'em for the day. And that's going to help me on the other side to be able to actually fall asleep, release the other corresponding hormones for me to actually go into a rested state. And so I'm going to maybe in the evening time light some candles or use some salt lamps or get a red light, or that would be one example of kind of like being smarter than the modern environment. Other things is in the modern world, we're not moving nearly as much as the entirety of our history has. So simple things that we can start to do to start to tap into that like ancestral in quotations self, or just tap into like that healthier, more vibrant, vital version of ourselves, is still be in the modern world, still do the work, still have a social media account, still do work on your computer or whatever, but take walking meetings, and go outside while you're doing them. It's like be intentional about gathering more rays of sunlight. Be intentional about just getting your body up and moving throughout the day. There's a long, I'm not going to just like go through what we could, go through a long list of all the things that our ancestors have done forever and what the health of our joints and our cells and our endocrine system and, just all of our, our humanness rides on.
If you had to do a Pareto's principle on the long list, what would be the top ones that you think would be the biggest bang for your buck?
Just be outside. Be outside as much as you can be outside. You want to be breathing, and if you can't be outside, bring outside inside. So bring plants into your house, bring natural sunlight into your house. Make sure that you are, when you're sitting beside a window, you're going to be blocking out a lot of the UVB rays specifically. And so you're getting this like, again, supplemented version of sunlight. So that supplemented version of sunlight is where you run into issues. If you're getting full spectrum sunlight, your body's been processing that for a very, very long time. And your body gets it. And if you're feeling like you're getting a sunburn, it's like, okay, you probably got too much sunlight. Time to get out of the sun. But we've kind of been sold the idea that the sun is like this hazard to our health. Like try telling any houseplant the sun's a hazard to your health. Maybe not houseplant, but try telling most plants that come from outside, which is where humans come from. Like we come from outside, and so that would be, I think, as far as bang for your buck, it would be like, either be outside as much as you can, or bring outside inside if you absolutely can't get outside, or just do both.
End of 2020, we went from Bali to Australia for a few months, and we had to quarantine in Perth, even though we'll actually go to the Sunshine Coast, which is on the other coast of Australia. And so we actually had to quarantine for 14 days in a 1-bedroom apartment, and we're a family of 5. No windows. They actually like welded the windows shut.
Wow.
The whole place was not bigger than this downstairs area right now with all of us.
Wow.
Like had to eat on the floor, had to clean our dishes in the bathroom sink, because there was no kitchenette or anything like that in it. And it was really interesting because I was like going in there and I was like my wife was bawling her eyes because she was very against all of that stuff. And I was just like, okay, like we've got 3 young kids. We need to get through the next 14 days. Like, how are we going to do it? And there's a couple of things you said that I really appreciated was like, one, I tried to use anchors as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So like throughout the day, before we had meals, like we had like movement time. So we had like one time of the day where we would do some yoga. We had one time of the day we would do some calisthenics. We had one time of the day where we would just like do some squats. I was, I got suitcases. I was standing on chairs and doing deadlifts with the suitcases, and like I got really experimental to try and figure this stuff out as well. And then the thing for me was not getting the sunlight, and there was this one window, and we knew, like I figured out the sun would be actually coming through the window between, it was like 2 and like 3:20 p.m. right, just from the angle, because there was a building next door, and I just stand there butt naked just trying to get some sun, and I was like, I know I'm not even getting the full UV spectrum because I'm standing through a glass pane as well. And I remember so clearly when we got out of quarantine, we then had to go to the airport to then fly to Brisbane, and I just stood in front of the airport, like I literally just ducked down to undies and just stood there in the sun, and it was like I could feel it just like soaking back in. And it's
a nutrient. I mean, photons it's a physical substance. It's not just like this invisible light. Like, no, it's literally particles penetrating your skin. Like the same way you would put, a piece of salmon into your mouth. Like you're gathering that light energy in through your skin. So really looking at it like that. So you stumbling through the book, you notice like the eat this. I think I chat, eat the sun for breakfast. Or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, like just reframing one's perspective.
Ingest.
Yeah,
Here
ingest the sun for breakfast.
Step 3, ingest the sun for breakfast.
Reframing our perception around the sun, as opposed to being this like villainized toxic substance that's going to give you wrinkles. It's like, yes, use proper sun protection when it's necessary. In the morning, it's not necessary. There's different arguments for which I'm like not expert enough on the topic to kind of like weigh in on, but it's safe to say that it's important to get very different spectrums of light throughout the day. So it's not like you just want to get sun between like 7 and 9 and then take cover for the rest of the day. Like think of the sun more like a variety of different nutrients. So in the morning time, you're getting these reds and these orange, and as those wavelengths of light change, become either faster and more into like that blue territory, or start to slow down and come into those oranges and reds. All of those have different beneficial effects on the body. So really, when you're like just reorienting the relationship to the sun, it's like like food. It's not a thing like it hurts my eyes. It's like no, it's like I'm literally you're nourishing yourself, and then sometimes you can eat too much food. And when you eat too much food, you feel like you have a stomach ache, or you feel bloated. You feel like it's too much food, too much water. Like, it's like exactly what the sun does. Like, the moment it's like, okay, that was enough sun. Your body start to get kind of hot. You feel like this inflammation kind of coming to the surface. You're like, okay, like that was. We went a little beyond. Like I'm veering towards hypernatremia, like too much water now. I'm messing my sodium levels up. So just reorienting one's relationship with the sun as being actually something like a nutrient to absorb, as opposed to being something to like villainize as something that's just going to give you wrinkles.
I appreciate you.
It's very problematic.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's really, really good. Outside of
and if you are going to use sunblock, use a sunblock like zinc oxide, or use a sunblock like a hat, or a sweatshirt or something that covers the sun.
And actually, going back to that, do you think a good way is you build up to it You start little bits and you go a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more,
exactly.
rather than be like, I'm just out or I'm just nothing.
It's the same. It's literally from a cellular, like a structural perspective. Exposing your body to sun is very much like exposing your body to a heavier,
progressive overload.
It's progressive overload.
There's my meathead coming back. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
No, that's it. It's perfect. Like so just like basic bro science, like meathead.
Yeah.
101, just we slowly add a little bit more weight. We progressively overload the system. If we blow the system out, then we get torn muscle, ligaments, we get, whatever type of scenario, inflammation. Same thing with too much sun. But you slowly start to build yourself up in those melanocytes and all the different, your skin, it literally becomes more durable and robust to be able to actually absorb sunlight in an effective way. But if not, and you've spent your whole, X amount of years or life actually like afraid of weightlifting, or afraid of cardiovascular activity, and you're suddenly thrusted into that environment, and you're like doing a vacation in Hawaii, and you just get blasted. And you're like, oh, yep, I was right. Like I was exercise definitely problematic. Like no. Like getting thrown in with the wolves, like problematic. But you slowly build it up, and you become a more robust individual.
Can I come back to Bruce Lipton?
Yeah.
What was the most fascinating part of Bruce's work for you?
Well, I think for him, so I was very, I still am I have like moments of being kind of like meatheadish, or like, like workout bro type vibe. And he was the first individual to really bridge the mind-body relationship to me in a very meaningful, accessible way. And I think with Bruce, what stands out as well is he's very, he just cares a lot. He's like a real human being. He's like very personable and very like, he like exudes like love and empathy. And so that's something I think a lot of our, it's like, what is that Bible verse? It's like you can trust the fruit, trust the tree based off of like the fruit that it bears. Okay. It's not that, but paraphrase, like we get a lot of information from a lot of sources. Everyone's an expert, everyone has a platform, everyone's written a book, everyone has a podcast, and everyone's like, cool, I'm just gonna like force myself into the position of expert because I'm trying to make a living. So for me, I think I'm very interested in the fruit that is being, bared by the sources. And so with Bruce, he's someone that's like, oh, interesting. Like whatever Kool-Aid you're drinking, you're very kind, and you're like very sweet, and you have this great relationship, and he's not jacked by any means, but he's like very happy in his body.
Yeah.
Like, cool.
Yeah.
I like what's going on here.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
But when someone's, the expert of health or government or policy or, especially like nutritional policy, like what, the humans should be eating, I'm like, can I, like, I'd like to know about your HRV. I'd like to know about your cholesterol. I'd like to like what's the source of this information exactly? Are you just extracting health into some like beaker, double-blind study research thing, or is there actually some kind of qualitative, experiential, like, oh, that's what I'm going to get? And so with Bruce, I think that's something that I really value about him, is he's just a very thoughtful, kind, and brilliant human being. It's also, be thoughtful, kind, all those things, and also like do meaningful things in the world. And to have the balance of all of his high-level peers, exalting him as like being the man, and being this really sweet, compassionate, kind human being. I think those would be like the combination that I find interesting.
I really like that. And what does the changing the environment to create the identity that you want, how are you currently trying to do that for yourself? Like you've moved a year ago. Like I'm really intrigued in this, one, personally, because I know I'm going to be going through an international move really soon. And two, I just think this is really important because, the environment is an amazing, powerful predictor of who the person is, what they do, the work they create, everything from there. How are you taking that from yourself?
Well, the thing that comes up, this isn't what you asked at all, but the thing that comes up, because I'm thinking of how different our lives are, because you have kids and I don't.
Yeah.
And something that's, I think, very interesting with being a father or a mother or just having kids, like I did I didn't post. I'm going to post a
Yeah.
video on the gram that I took of me going through like some mobility exercises while I was at an airport.
Yeah.
And it was when I was coming back from Costa Rica a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about the video is there's this little, maybe like 1-year-old child that's crawling and moving around and all that stuff that's behind me with their family. And he's just completely in awe
Yeah.
of this ridiculousness that
Yeah.
this stranger, being me, is doing at the airport.
Yeah.
Doesn't care about anything else. He just sees me doing these random, like, stretchy exercises. I set my little camera up, my little tripod thing, and I'm just going through my little thing. And the whole time he's just
Cool.
and crawling over, like getting up into my business, just like, like that is parenting.
Yeah.
Like, the kid does not give a shit about what I say to him.
Yeah.
Like that experience of, it's all going in. Like, that's parenting. You know, so in that instance, he was in the airport environment, which isn't really ideal for him at a cellular level. But then there's also the human environment. You know, so in that case, his parents seemed really great as well. The dad was like pretty, stoked about all the things. And like in that moment, this random stretchy guy at the airport like was his environment. You know, and so that's, I think, with in your scenario, I think it's like you even asking these questions is really meaningful, as a father. And just by you starting to process, like have a seed of like, oh yeah, like how does my environment inform my children and myself? And
Wait, what, like,
just asking the question, I think like that's like almost enough. You're like, okay, like stop there. Like, cool, like enough, like podcast over, conversation done. Like just start to walk into your office, walk into your home, walk into any of the places that you go, the bar that you go to, or the, any of that, the gym that you go to, and start to observe and say, okay, like take the story of me out of the picture. How would this mold form a biological organism?
Yes.
Like, what would it do?
Yes.
And if you go into your home and it's kind of dark, there's not a lot of windows, there's not a lot of floor space to move around and like allow your kids and yourself to like play, or starfish out on the ground. If you had a big day, if your only option is to, pull yourself into the couch and just kind of like hunch over and then peel your eyes to the blue lit screen at like 11 o'clock at night when your body is just dying for a little bit of red light.
Yeah.
How is that going to form this biological organism that you call Harry or Tom or Lisa?
I think I've been almost obsessed with thinking about this recently, because with the 4 girls, like, okay, so they get back from school, I pick the girls up from school, and kind of like the ritual is come back, clothes off, in the pool, sometime on the grass, and we just like chill out for a while, and then usually sit down on the grass, have some fruit, have like a snack sort of thing, and then it's like, okay, we can chill out, maybe go do some art, maybe do some like blocks, like something along those lines during that time period. And I've been really thinking, I was like, Austin was a place we were thinking about moving to. I was like, is that something we would do here? Like, what are the rituals and daily routines that we would go to? Okay, what would happen in Spain? Okay, like, do you know what I mean? Like, what would happen if we were somewhere else? Like, I was like trying to put those scenarios into play as like, what are the rituals and routines that we would be in? And then very much coming from a place of like, okay, like, is this the childhood and environment that I want my girls to be able to go through? And then I was obviously asking it for myself as well. What is it that I want to be doing?
You're like talking to your internal child through your external child.
Oh, 100%. Totally, dude. Yeah.
I was thinking about, I was having a conversation with a friend recently. She just had a baby like 2 days ago. But I was talking to her a week ago before, while the baby was inside of her still. Yeah. And that was the interesting just like moment that came up of just that idea that it's like, what's it like having a human inside of your human? And she's like just stumbled into, it's like having my my little girl inside of me, and it's like, oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Like that, like your child is an extension of your child. Kind of like, whoa. You know?
Yeah, see,
It's like how do I want to talk to my inner child? How do I want to? And then, here it is manifested, and it's like it's this incarnated form. It's he or she is running about, my internal child from my internal loins, and my internal psyche, and my internal emotions, and my internal environmental conditions, and my ancestry, and like, how do I orient around this being? And you don't actually need to have a physical, external, internal child, running around pooping on your rug in order to have that conversation with, like, what does my internal child want today? Especially as being like a big, strong, like, muscle bro guy. Even the idea of like internal child feels almost like shameful.
Well, we had an interview just the other day, and I specifically, Christine Hazlitt, we went really deep into inner child work, because for me, over the past 18 months, a bit more, that was huge for me. Like really going into and doing that work. And for me, I can always picture little Chris, he's always to my left, and then just being able to like see him and give him what he needs and talk to him and make sure that he feels heard. And for me, actually, as a child, the thing that's come up a lot, like with psychotherapy and doing the work and doing all that stuff, was back then, my Chris never had the guidance that he wanted or needed. And so I felt like I was asking, like, what's the point? Like, am I doing good? Am I doing bad? I'm not too sure, like, what's going on? And I didn't really know, like, what's the point of all of this? Like, why are we doing this? Why are we here? Like, why are we playing this game?
Yeah, it's great to ask that question.
And I'm still asking that question today.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, regularly. Yeah, there's a not to get you off track.
No, go for it.
A quote from, you ever heard of Bessel van der Kolk wrote the book Body Keeps a Score?
I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
One of the things that he's said that's in that book that I like is that physical self-awareness is the first step to releasing the tyranny of the past.
Oh, wow.
So like starting to come into that, like there's lots of different doorways in. If you talk to Christine, her doorway would probably be more like maybe, I don't know, Gestalt therapy, or like communicating to your inner child. Maybe she might say, okay, your child is that in that pillow. There's little Chris. Like, what would you like to say to that child? What would that child like to say? Instead of it just being like this scrambled, kind of internalized, I don't know where it is thing. There's something nice about objectifying and putting the sensation, into the external environment, be able to like hold the sensation, or hold the child where it may be. But then, there's another doorway in, which is entering in through the body and seeing, is there some deeply held contractions or resistances or movement patterns in the Bible, in the body, that are in alignment with, kind of like in alignment with your own misalignment.
Yes.
Or in alignment with that protection. And so the way that a person walks through a room is the way that a person walks through their life. That's a quote from Ida Rolf. And, so when a person just breathes, like every moment you're breathing the history of your life. You're breathing the story of who you think you are, and, potential maybe resistances or fears or contractions or freedoms or liberations or expression or safety. The way that a person breathes, if you have resistance around the diaphragm, or if you have some type of, maybe you have like this defensive kind of hyperkyphotic folded forward type armadillo-ish turtle position, all of that comes out in your physical postural patterns, which those send information to those around us. It sends feedback saying, oh, that person comes in and they feel kind of glum. Oh, they seem kind of like defensive. Oh, why doesn't that person ever look at me when we're talking to each other? And that person, they're always kind of like pacing. Why are they always so pacey? Or why is that person so kind of, he's very like grandiose, like ostentatious, like very like big. Like it seems like they're going out of their way to be big. Or that person feels very just like balanced. It's like they come into a room and it just like, everyone kind of like exhales a little bit. And they're just like, wow. The person's like an ocean. It's like, okay, what is it about that person? Well, it's like a lot of it is visual information that you're processing in the meaning of all of those postural expressions, like the tens of thousands of micro postures and gestures that we're continually projecting out into the world. It's a lot of information. And so you can start to tune that information through physical investigation. And that physical investigation could look like manual therapy, it could look like physical therapy, it could look like dance, it could look like boxing, it could look like meditation, it could look like breathing pattern restoration, the term I just made up. But you know, it could look like whatever you want.
I was going with it, dude.
Yeah, that works. I like that. I like breathing pattern restoration. I mean, there's a lot of ways to restore breathing patterns, but you know, and so as a person, so it's just starting. It's another reframe. You know, looking at the body as not just like a physical, you know, like skin bag that's just kind of like a vehicle to get you from place to place.
Yeah.
Your body's also this incredible symphony that's projecting this amazing music all the time. So the contortion, the way that you move and breathe and express yourself, it's literally, it's like, well, maybe figuratively, music for other people to hear and for yourself to hear. And if you want to express, maybe you want to be more like that ocean type person that's like, wow, they're just like chilling. Like, wow. Well, then it would probably be wise to orient yourself around deeper, fuller breathing patterns and be able to really learn how to get a full exhalation and release those muscles around maybe the intercostals or the diaphragm or visceral tissue that you may have like deep held tension. Maybe your iliopsoas is like rocked down, bound against your spine all the time. You're kind of stuck in this hyperlordotic extension position. Kind of puts this like stiffness and rigidity in your body. Now that's the way you sing. And then you could take that into like literally singing. You know, if you want to be able to sing well, you're going to want to be able to find that stacked, aligned orientation. Just the singing starts from the feet, up into the knees, up into the hips, the pelvic floor, orientation of the respiratory diaphragm. You know, it's this cylinder, it's this sound box. Sound comes out, right? So it's very literal if a person's learning how to sing, but we're always singing to each other. Like the idea that words aren't really, like, words aren't just words. Words are sounds that are packed with an immense amount of information outside of just the little definition inside of a dictionary. All the intonations and the tonality and like the pacing of how we communicate and you know, like all of that, like it's just filled with information that cause emotion. Like it causes others to emote or to close down or to, you know, to push away. You know,
Yeah, I think it's interesting with the these face noises that we make at each other.
Yeah, they're face noises. And they're not just face, and they're body noises.
Yes, yeah, sorry, it goes beyond just
from
the
your diaphragm
vibration itself
Yeah.
as to everything else that's coming from this physical
It's kind of like
thing.
it's like your spirit incarnated into, you know, particle wave form, you know, sound. It's like there's a deeper consciousness that gets oriented and interpreted through this instrument called the body and goes out.
Would that also attach to the intuition?
Yeah, I think so.
Like
yeah,
the
and the less noisy a person is in their body, the more access they have to deeper information. All a person has to do is meditate for 12 minutes, and they'll start to tap into the like deeper wisdom parts of themselves that you will not hear if you're continually glued to your next to-do list. This just won't be present. You know, so maybe eat a handful of mushrooms, maybe do a darkness retreat, maybe do a Vipassana.
I've got 8 grams just down there if you want some.
That's great. Yeah, maybe go through some near-death experience thing, maybe have a baby, which again, I don't have any experience with, but I'd imagine. Maybe run a marathon, maybe do anything that's really hard and pushes you into some deeper part of yourself, like some like deep cave inside of you that you didn't know existed. And suddenly you might start getting these like voices like, who the fuck was that? It's like, oh, that's you. Like who you thought you were, all this like, I need more money, I need bigger tits, I need to have a brighter, fancier car to prove to my dad something or my neighbor something, which are just projections of my dad or mom or whatever, or prove myself something or, all of that. That's just like it's beautiful, it's great, it's lots of amazing, lovely information to be like held and cherished and loved. And it's kind of like this like static. And then you can, if you present the opportunity to have some quietness, suddenly there's like, oh, there's like this other voice, and even talking about stuff like that in a culture that's kind of resistant to anything that's kind of outside of like the, like, I don't know, you say like Newtonian mechanics. If it's not like physics, cool, I drop it there, it goes down. When you start to get into these other places, like, okay, well, tell me where the spirit is, or tell me where this like deeper, like the Greeks, they called it your inner daemon, and so then that got reinterpreted as like a bad thing. But that inner daemon is like this inner voice, this inner knowing that everyone has access to. It's outside of the church, it's outside of any book that you've ever read. Like you have this inner daemon. It's the same meaning of genius. So that inner genius is just the same thing. It's that inner voice. But if you place that into a culture that doesn't have definitions to fit that perspective, it just all gets thrown away.
I've been doing a weekly float tanning session for about 2 years now, and I love it. It's just something I just do not want to give up. Like I really, really enjoy that because I find it's like, oh, I can hear now. I can actually get those messages of the stuff that the noisiness of my life hasn't been allowing me on like a day-to-day level. And I remember I did a 2-day darkness retreat a little while ago, and
I'm signed up for one in I think it's either 5 or 6 day in Oregon in November.
Okay, cool, yeah. Really cool. Yeah. So I did 2 days a few months ago, and I was like wanting to build up to do a 7-day one. So
I feel
really
like if you
interested.
do 2 day, you may as well just do the longer one.
I kind of felt like that, but I also had like a Buddhist practitioner who was just like, just chill. You don't have to go like all the way in the deep end straight away. It's just like,
right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, it was an amazing experience, and that's when I was like, oh, I could really hear
cool
what was going on.
Sweet.
And it was really clear. And it was also extremely amusing because like the epiphanies, the downloads that I had, and like I practiced writing in the dark so I could like, write things down when I got those.
And you come out and you just have like scribbles of nothing.
It actually worked out all right, but it was cool. The practicing was hilarious because I remember I was practicing at home and the girls were just like laughing at me because I'd just write on the same line the entire time.
That's amazing.
But it worked out pretty well at the end of the day. But it was interesting because that voice was very clear. And I could have a conversation with it, like I could have a back and forth with it as well. And I was just like, oh, wow, this is profound.
Yeah, I think people are for the most part, are well, people. I think I historically have been like scared of that inner voice. That's like Marianne Williamson, who I've also did a podcast with her. I think also like a couple years ago. That's one of her things. Is like we're not scared of. How's she go? It's something along the lines of our greatest fear is like how powerful we actually are.
Oh wow, okay.
So we think we're afraid of failure and like all the terrible things, but like the deeper fear is actually how fucking amazing you really truly are. And stepping into that, like no, like this is like your king or queen version of yourself. And letting go of just all of like the ways that we like play small in quotations. Like I think that part's, if we're really honest with ourselves, is quite terrifying. And if we allow ourselves to buy the idea that we are of not greater worth, but yeah, maybe worth. I don't know. I feel like value is kind of an interesting thing. Like, do you feel valuable yourself? Like, how does like
not all the time? No.
Yeah. How does that?
I think one of the deepest wounds that I've had that's come up is me not feeling worthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is it? How has it come up for you? Where do you notice it? Or do you feel it in your body?
Limiting what I do and what I will act upon and what I believe I can do.
Where do you feel it in your body right now?
In my what's it called? Plexus?
Solar plexus?
Solar plexus. Sorry, solar plexus.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Where exactly?
Yeah.
What does it feel like?
Like it's stuck. Almost nauseous.
Is it something that you are... What does it feel like if you keep investigating it? Is it maybe explore? Does it maybe have a texture to it? Does it have a color to it? Does it have a sound to it? Does it have a depth to it?
No sound. Dark.
What happens if you continue kind of like investigating into the darkness?
It wants to say something.
What does it want to say? Unless it doesn't need to be effable.
It's like it's saying you are worthy. It's like me giving you the time and attention to it, and it dissipates out.
Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah. And so for the most part, I think what I do, and probably many people do, we're littered with those little kind of vacuous, dark, kind of scary spaces inside our psyches, and they manifest in our body and all that. And the common tendency is to create various different avoidant patterns to kind of like ambulate around those places, and then it stays as that like scary, dark thing. And then I think there's also an interesting opportunity to actually, again, change the mindset or perspective to be really excited about those spaces and say like, oh, cool, like another one, like what's in there, And so as opposed to it being a thing that's like, oh, I don't like that, it's like no, like let's go investigate.
Something I think I actually did really well was going into the darkness retreat, especially, was just like the one thing I wanted to walk in with was curiosity. I just wanted to investigate everything that wanted to come up. Like I just really wanted to be curious as much as possible, which was amazing because every time something came up, I was like, I'm like, what else am I going to do? I'm going to sit here and just really investigate this right now and really see where it wants to go and what's going on right now and why it's wanting to come up. And that was really interesting because that's when I felt like I could have those conversations to be able to kind of like get to what was going on.
Yeah, that's like that. I mean, that's where growth exists. That's like you in exercise or like life terms called the zone of proximal development. It's like keeping yourself at the edge of boundaries that are challenging to make it over the obstacle, but you're just able to make it over.
Yeah.
And so each day actually being filled with these boundaries that you're like just are obstacles that you're just able to make over, that with time leads to a fulfilled life. And so much of what we or I do is kind of like attempt to mitigate those boundaries and mitigate those obstacles. And another perspective to take is saying like, no, like I'm actually excited about these obstacles.
No, okay, yeah.
And so suddenly with that reframe, it's like you can't hurt that person, you can't kill that person, like they're already dead. Like I think of that sometimes with the idea of death. Like what's like if there's something to be afraid of at a deep down core level, it would probably, if there's fear in an individual, I think if you kept unpacking deeper, eventually probably some fear of like one's own demise, and maybe like it could come out as like, oh, not fulfilling my you know, my greatest potential in this lifetime, or like, you know, whatever it comes out as. But ultimately, it's like this resistance or contraction, or like holding on to life, you know, and that ultimately will lead to an individual leading a life and creating their success or their family, or, you know, whatever the thing is, through this root source of resistance, contraction, attachment, kind of like, ugh. And then you create these compensatory patterns that come out in the form of businesses, or, you know, whatever you do.
Yep.
And it's such a, I think for people that have had experiences, that it might be like maybe like you almost died, your car accident, or some psychedelic thing, or some darkness retreat thing, or whatever. You know, the opportunity to come to that point of actually accepting, like, not being attached to this idea of yourself.
Yep.
And like really truly being able to come from a place of like, I'm like, take me, it's okay, like you can take me. And then being able to come from that place and reconstitute your ego and reconstitute yourself, not from the place of this is the entirety of who I am, I am my car and my body and my money and, you know, all of the things. But it's like, oh no, like I wield that game well. Like I love investing in the game of self, but I'm not sold the idea that this is all there ever is or ever was. And if this goes away, then suddenly, like, oh my God, like it's going to be painful or a travesty or any of that.
We had this conversation this morning, and it's kind of like holding the paradox between this is really serious and this is not serious at all.
Yeah, it's both. They're equal.
Yeah.
And so I think a person can you can get too far into that conversation where it just ends up like this circular nowhere land of like, great, nothing matters, and this isn't real, and I could, you know, transition out of this body and no big deal or whatever. It's like, and well, you also have kids, you know, and you also like have dreams and hopes and desires, and you also have been dropped into this life bucket for whatever reason or not reason, you know, so it deeply matters, you know, and it also doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
And so it like comes back to that, you know, well, maybe for the first time in this conversation, but that balance, you know, like that duality part of like light, dark, yin, yang, wildly matters so much more than anything in the world. And also it's just a dream. And so and then, you know, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, analytical, structural, get things done, you know, right hemisphere, or at least the story of the right hemisphere, it's, you know, creative, throw colors at the wall, intuition, listening, introspection, you know, so it's that balance between both sides that I think makes like a really balanced whole person. But if an individual just allows themselves to be dust in the wind of modernity, you will probably wind up in a place of resistance and attachment to, you know, monetary gain and like physical goods and wealth and power and social status and the social hierarchy, and but to believe that is all that there is, it's problematic. There's going to be a deep resistance and attachment and like a deep fear in that. So that's, I mean, I think that's what the Bible represents. It's what, like, you know, a lot of like the religions, you know, and like the symbolism of like death and reincarnation. You know, so it's like that process, and their suggestion that the Bible is actually like an analogy for the psychedelic experience. You know, which, you know, whatever people can read. What is the is it Michael Muraku, I think is how you say his name. The book is called, I'm spacing the name of the book, but it gets it. Hopefully I'll remember it by the end of this. He did a podcast with Rogan. It was like maybe about a year and a half ago or so. He went on there, and it gets all into like the Eleusinian mysteries and this, like, you know, ancient, possibly psychedelic cult scenario, or like all like the royalty and all like the, you know, the great minds all go to this secret, mysterious place in called I think it's in the town of Eleusis, and they would go drink this sacred sacrament and go like commune with God and come back and essentially have like this like death, reincarnation, born again type experience. And to be able to have that experience in whatever form you do, I think it like grants the opportunity to have freedom in a person's life and like liberation in a person's life, as opposed to feeling like an indentured servant or a slave to to-do lists. Come from a place of like what can I create, and actually coming into that place of like feeling like not a God in the sense that like you are God and other things aren't, but feeling congruent with all that is God, and you are God, and you are God, and you are God, and this is God, and this is God. But like to be in that place as opposed to being like, the other side of being like, oh, like I'm like the naughty boy or naughty girl. And there's kind of this weird split type scenario. That's interesting to me.
It's amazing. I appreciate where this conversation's gone a lot. I really do. I always love jamming with you, Aaron. It's always really fun, dude. Where does the listener, the watcher, where do we go right now to have more of the brilliance that is you?
Well, I mean, if you're interested in actual, tangible, actionable movement and self-care related things, the book would be a great starting point. It's called The Align Method. And then we have a free community that we created just a few weeks ago.
Oh, great.
And there's that's been a really beautiful thing. It's called The Align Community. There's about 1,000 people in there now, which is great. So I pop in there every day. And we share exclusive content around like self-care and movement, things of the sort. So that's at alignpodcast.com/community. So that'd be a great place to go as far as like getting kind of like inside what's going on. Then I host a podcast called The Align Podcast, obviously. And that would be the place where more conversations like this end up emerging. And it's me talking to people that I'm just very surprised and impressed that I have the opportunity to talk to some of the people like Bruce Lipton and people of the sort. So that would probably be the place.
Amazing.
Places, yeah.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate you, dude. I always love getting together with you, and I want so much more. If it's cool with you, when I come back later this year, I want to jam again. So I will beg and plead for that to happen as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
amazing,
I'm back. Yeah.
I appreciate you, bro.
Cool.
Thank you, dude.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, dude.
All right.